Well, hi and hello. I'm Nick. This is my channel. And you might not know this about me, but I enjoy art channels. In case you couldn't tell. And as someone with a perfectly healthy attachment to the Pokemon franchise, and you cannot argue otherwise, I am of course a very frequent viewer of the popular Fakémon artist channel, TrueGreen7. So when Ron posted that he's holding a Fakémon design contest, you know I had to get in on that. And honestly, I just needed an easy video idea after the massive workload that was the Monster High one. So let's get into it, shall we? Before I actually start drawing, I figured you might need a little context as to what this contest actually is. So Mr. True Green has drawn us 3 starter Pokemon: Sleaf, Quickindle, and Aguana. And I'm a little embarrassed at how many takes it took me to pronounce all 3 of those. The challenge was to design a middle and final stage for all 3 of those, taking into consideration how actual starter Pokemon evolve on a concept as opposed to just getting bigger. I'm looking at you, Temtem. And while it technically wasn't part of the challenge, I gave my starter trio an overlying theme like most of the recent starters have. But with all the rules out of the way, let's get to actually evolving these guys. Going in, I knew I wanted to give Sleaf's evolution some sort of moss theming, because if you didn't know, because sloths are so slow, moss has a tendency to grow on their fur. I also wanted to change its body type from being a traditional 3-toed sloth to an extinct giant ground sloth, as that reads more as large and imposing like a final starter should be. And when doing my research to see if giant ground sloths were actually sloths, I discovered that a close relative of sloths is the anteater, so I was able to give my final evolution a big bushy tail made out of moss like you'd see on a giant anteater. For the middle evolution, I just went the Dartrix or Raboot route where it's literally just an angsty teen, and I used the moss to create a hood like you'd see on one of those baggy sweatshirts. I moved its leaf over its eye, and I added stripes on its arms to kind of give off that Hot Topic teen energy you'd see in the early 2000s. That sort of over-the-top edginess really helps lean into the fact that the final evolution gains the ghost typing. Without spoiling what the starter's theme is, I knew I wanted this evolution to be an opera singer, specifically the Phantom of the Opera. I've never seen the musical, but I thought it worked visually. So I stylized the leaf on the middle evolution and the face markings on the final evolution to kind of look like the Phantom's mask. When posing them, I wanted the middle stage's pose to be very intentionally cluttered. It has its arms on the strings of its hoodies, pulling them down. It doesn't want to be seen, it doesn't want to be perceived. As for the final evolution, it's the exact opposite. It's in one of those poses where you put your hand on your chest and you belt out the biggest vibrato you've ever heard. I think. I don't know a lot about opera. The base form is predominantly cream with brown accents, so for the sake of making the evolved forms look darker and more grim, I swapped that around. And as they evolve, the browns will slowly but surely desaturate alongside the darker greens, which become more minty blue, kind of like what you'd see in a foggy night in the jungle. I gave the final evolution big-ass claws, because I imagined if it had a walk cycle, it would be slowly dragging its arms behind it because they're just that heavy. It would also give off a bit of a corpse vibe without making the design so unappealing it doesn't pass as a Pokemon. Floravora, the baritone Pokemon. For some unknown reason, Floravora is only ever seen in the dead of night, where they can be heard singing melancholic songs with no clear purpose. Now, I'm not usually a big fan of the big, bulky starters like the Rillabooms, the Empoleons, and the Skeledirges of the world, but I actually really like this guy. Granted, I'm a hard grass starter defender, so that might just be my bias talking. The middle stage's name, Mossloth, is pretty obvious, but Floravora was actually a really fun coincidence. The name obviously comes from flora, which means plant, but also comes from the word folivora, which is the suborder sloths and ground sloths fall under. It's ghost type for the same reason Decidueye is, being that it's based off an extinct animal. And in all honesty, I kind of referenced Decidueye a lot during this design process. It definitely isn't my favorite Pokemon or anything. We're gonna move on now before I start gushing. Now, I'm not gonna lie to y'all, Quickindle made me its bitch. For some reason, I just could not figure out how to make an anthropomorphic bird, which is weird because, again, my favorite Pokemon is an anthropomorphic bird. The idea I was going with is that since Quickindle looks so shy and meek, I thought it'd be interesting if its evolutionary line had the idea of a shy kid becoming the class clown to deal with their insecurities, and then becoming a professional performer using those skills they learned as the class clown. In case you haven't noticed, I really like clowns. It also gave me an excuse to make the final evolution a fairy type, which meant I could implement a lot more colors than just reds and oranges. I made the legs of the middle and final evolution kind of resemble fireworks for that same reason. I imagine the final evolution's signature move would probably have something to do with a lot of colorful fire. I wanted the middle evolution to have a sort of cheeky, mischievous personality you'd expect from someone who's trying too hard to be funny, whereas the final evolution is much more graceful and confident in itself, something you need as a performer. Plus, male birds. What really stumped me was trying to figure out how to pose the final evolution. I think the main issue was just I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with its wings. Did I want them to be wings? Did I want them to be hands? Did I want them to be something like what Decidueye had, where they were kind of in between? I decided to settle on making them normal wings because out of the 4 bird starters we have yet, none of them have just straight up wings. Decidueye kind of has them, but like I mentioned, they're also kind of hands. I also took the Quaxley route of turning a more temperate bird into a more exotic one with its evolutions. Specifically, the final evolution is a scarlet macaw. I figured the reds, blues, and yellows of a scarlet macaw worked really well with the clown idea I was going with, and plus, all the starters that TrueGreen made were seemingly inspired by South American animals, so I thought it fit. I moved the little dots under Quickindle's eyes to be clown cheeks, and the little dot on its beak to be a clown nose. I also turned its eyes into something you'd see from a Rubber Hose cartoon as a reference to the Roadrunner and Looney Tunes. A Klequin, the showman Pokemon. A Klequin always need to be the center of attention. Their feathers always seem to be warm even when wet, and give off a slight crackling sound. Oh wow, I really did just make my avatar as a bird. And we're not going to talk about what that might mean for me. The middle evolution's name of Spark Clown is pretty on the nose, but I am really proud of coming up with the name of Klequin. It's a mix of the words eclectic, which means a lot or maximalist, falcon, and harlequin, another word for a jester. And if you look up in the little inspiration section, you'll also see this guy's supposed to be a drag queen. Because again, male birds. Now I'm just going to clarify right off the bat, I pronounce the lizard these guys are based off of as Aguana, so it's very difficult for me to pronounce the Pokemon's name Aguana, so just bear with me. I know it's kind of generic, but I went with sailor vibes for these guys because marine iguanas exclusively live on the Galapagos Islands, so if they wanted to be on a mainland region, they'd have to swim their way there. I gave the middle evolution a much stockier build and stripes on its stomach to give that sort of classic sailor look, definitely giving Mr. Smee vibes from Peter Pan. In contrast, the final evolution is much thinner. I wanted it to have the body type you'd expect someone to be constantly flipping and doing acrobatics during a sword fight would have. On the topic of sword fighting, the end of its tail is a sword. Aguana clearly had some sort of rocky texture on its body, so I figured I'd translate that into a super callous tail that the final evolution could use as a weapon. If you haven't put it together yet, the final evolution is a pirate, because pirates are sick as fuck. The whole evolutionary line was designed to be sort of a family dynamic. You have Aguana as the basic crewmates, the middle evolution as a sort of first mate, and then the final evolution as a captain. You'll notice through my entire sketching process, I had a very similar issue with the final evolution of this line that I did with a Klequin, which is that I couldn't figure out how to pose the body. I didn't want it to look too much like Inteleon, despite the fact I love Inteleon, but it was also going to have a very thin lizard body, so I knew that was inevitable. I just couldn't figure out specifically what to do with it. I was initially going to be having it holding the tail like a sword. The problem was that kind of muddied the silhouette, so I eventually settled on having it holding its tail to the ground, so it still gives off the idea that its tail could be used as a sword, but it's not currently using it now. I also changed the eye markings Aguana had to being an eye patch-like symbol in its final evolution, really nailing home the whole pirate thing. As for colors, I slowly but surely lightened up the blue as this Pokemon evolved so that I could introduce black to the palette, but it wouldn't be too muddied. And I don't want to hear it out of any of you that I basically just reversed engineered Greninja. Froakie was my first Pokemon ever. I will take the comparisons as a badge of honor. The final evolution is meant to resemble a monitor lizard. Specifically, the West African Nile monitor lizard, an invasive species in South America, just like how pirates invaded South America. Monaguano, the swashbuckling Pokemon. Monaguano are naturally mischievous Pokemon. They like to mess with humans by stealing abandoned or worthless objects and burying them. Despite being my least favorite of the three I designed, this thing is still cool as hell. Swabaguana's name obviously comes from the term swab the decks, but Monaguano's name comes from a combination of monitor lizard, iguana, and marinero, a term for a Spanish sailor. This thing definitely falls into the edgy starter category Pokemon like Greninja, Decidueye, Meowscarada fall into. And frankly, I'm fine with that, because all those Pokemon are awesome. And here we have my final starter evolutions. I'll give y'all 5 more seconds to try and guess what their overarching theme is. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The overarching theme I gave these guys were the 3 Shakespearean genres, which for those of you who don't know are tragedy, comedy, and history. Floravora represents tragedy because he's a dramatic opera singer, but Shakespearean tragedies are usually defined by someone dying at the end, hence the ghost type. Eclequin represents comedy, being a clown, but Shakespearean comedies tended to end in weddings, hence the fairy type, which is commonly associated with love. And Marijuana represents history by being a pirate. Or at the very least, the historically romanticized version of a pirate. So if these 3 were to be a starter trio in an actual game, which one would you pick? Personally, I am leaning more towards Eclequin, but again, I'm very biased. But frankly, all 3 of these were meant to fit my personal taste in starters, so I'd be happy with any of them. Thank you so much for watching this video. To my surprise, I didn't get sick while making it again. And I just wanted my returning subscribers to know that I will be taking a short hiatus from this channel. I want to rework some of the video assets I have so this can be something I'm more proud of, but I do plan to be back by August, for some August, and I hope to have this channel fully rebooted by sometime later this year. But with all that being said, I've been Nick the Clown, you've been watching my channel, and please remember, don't die.